Have you ever looked at your life and realized that nothing truly touches you the way it used to? Not in a dramatic way. Not because everything is falling apart, but because somewhere along the way, your inner world became quieter than it should be. You still respond. You still smile when something good happens. You still say the right things when something goes wrong. But deep down, it feels like your emotional life has been turned down to a low volume. The highs do not rise very high. The lows do not sink very deep. Everything feels controlled, contained, distant. And that distance can be hard to explain, because from the outside, you may seem completely fine. You wake up, you go to work, you answer messages, you handle responsibilities, you keep moving. But inside, something feels missing. Not chaos, not breakdown, just a quiet absence. If that feeling has been following you lately, this video is for you. Because what many people call emotional numbness does not usually begin with a sudden collapse. It begins with something much more subtle. It begins when the mind slowly learns that feeling less is easier than feeling too much. And one of the clearest signs of that process is emotional avoidance. Now, when people hear that phrase, they often imagine someone pushing their feelings down in an obvious way. They imagine denial, suppression, refusing to talk about pain. But emotional avoidance is often much quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like being overly reasonable. Sometimes it looks like staying productive. Sometimes it looks like always having something to do, something to watch, something to think about. Shannon, because those behaviors seem normal, most people do not even realize what is happening. They assume they are being strong. They assume they are being mature. They assume they are simply not very emotional people. But the truth is more complicated. Avoiding emotions does not mean you have no emotions. It means your mind has learned to keep them at a safe distance. You can name what happened. You can explain why it affected you. You can even talk about it in a thoughtful, intelligent way. But actually feeling it is something else. That is where many people get stuck. They understand their pain, but they do not experience it fully. They can describe sadness without really allowing themselves to sit inside sadness. They can explain hurt without truly meeting the hurt itself. It is like standing outside in the rain and describing the storm perfectly while never letting a single drop touch your skin. And over time, that habit changes the way you relate to yourself. One of the most common ways this happens is through overthinking. A lot of emotionally disconnected people are not unaware. In fact, they are often highly self-aware. They notice patterns. They understand their triggers. They reflect deeply. But awareness alone is not the same as emotional contact. You can know exactly why something upset you and still never let yourself feel the actual weight of it. This is where the mind becomes a translator. It takes a raw emotional signal and converts it into thought. Grief becomes analysis. Fear becomes strategy. Disappointment becomes explanation. Loneliness becomes philosophy. And while that may sound insightful, it can also become a defense. Because thoughts feel safer than feelings. Thoughts can be organized. Thoughts can be controlled. Thoughts stay in neat lines. Emotions do not. Emotions arrive in the body. They shake things loose. They create discomfort. They ask you to pause. They ask you to feel without solving. And for a mind that learned survival through control, that can feel deeply uncomfortable. So the inner rule becomes simple. Stay informed about your emotions. Just do not get too close to them. Another sign of emotional avoidance is constant stimulation. Pay attention to what happens in silence. For many people, the moment the room becomes quiet, something unsettled begins to rise. A strange heaviness, a restless feeling, an unnamed sadness, a hollow pressure in the chest. Sense that something unresolved is waiting just beneath the surface. And instead of staying there, the hand reaches for the phone. One more short video, one more podcast, one more task, one more scroll, one more distraction before bed. Not necessarily because these things are deeply enjoyable, Sometimes they are simply easier than being alone with what the body has been trying to say all day. This is important to understand. Many escapes are not really about pleasure. They are about interruption. They interrupt the moment when emotion might finally become visible. That is why some people stay busy even when they are exhausted. That is why others fill every quiet moment with content. That is why some people cannot rest without feeling strangely uneasy. The nervous system is trying to stay ahead of something. And when that pattern continues long enough, life begins to lose emotional texture. This is one of the most confusing parts of emotional avoidance. At first, it may seem helpful. You feel less reactive, less overwhelmed, less affected. You may even tell yourself that you are doing better because nothing hits you as hard anymore. But slowly, you begin to notice the cost. Good news lands, but barely. A meaningful moment happens, but it fades too quickly. You achieve something you worked hard for, and instead of feeling joy, you feel a brief mental acknowledgement and then emptiness again. At the same time, painful experiences may also feel strangely muted. You know something should hurt. You know it matters. But the emotional response feels delayed, shallow, or distant. This is the paradox. The mind cannot selectively numb pain forever without also dulling vitality. When it turns down sadness, it often turns down joy. When it lowers fear, it may also lower excitement. When it blocks emotional overload, it may also block emotional aliveness. This is why emotional numbness can feel so unsettling. It is not just the absence of pain, it is the absence of color. Life still happens, but it starts to feel like you are watching it from behind glass. You are present, but not fully inside it. And that is often when people start relying even more on coping habits. They eat without hunger. They drink to soften the edge of the evening. They binge shows they are not even interested in. They scroll for hours without remembering what they watched. They stay online because going inward feels harder than staying distracted. Again, this does not make someone weak. It does not make them lazy. It does not mean they are broken. It usually means they are trying, in the only way they know how, to create relief. Because underneath these habits, there is often an emotional backlog. Unprocessed stress, accumulated disappointment, quiet grief, unspoken anger, lingering loneliness, old hurt that was never given enough space to move through. And when the system has carried too much for too long, it begins to protect itself. That is the part many people misunderstand. Emotional numbness is not always a sign that a person feels too little. Very often, it is a sign that they have felt too much for too long, too much pressure without recovery, too much pain without support, too much adaptation without rest. At first, the mind uses temporary strategies. It distracts, it minimizes, it rationalizes, it keeps going. But when the overload becomes chronic, the brain may shift into something more protective. Instead of processing each feeling at full intensity, it lowers the volume of the entire emotional system. In simple terms, your mind may decide that shutting some doors is safer than leaving everything open, and that decision often happens unconsciously. This is why emotional numbness can coexist with competence. A person may look successful and still feel internally disconnected. They may function well while feeling almost nothing deeply. They may be admired for being calm while privately wondering where their real self went. If you relate to this, there is something important I want you to hear. Your emotional distance may not be a personal failure. It may be a survival pattern. At some point, your system may have learned that full emotional contact was too overwhelming, too risky, or too exhausting. So it adapted. It created space between you and what you feel, not to destroy you, but to help you continue. And that shift deserves compassion, because healing does not begin with blaming yourself for being numb. Healing begins when you understand that numbness often has a purpose. It is protection that stayed too long. So what helps? The first step is not forcing emotion. Many people notice this disconnection and immediately try to break through it all at once. They want a big release. They want to cry again. They want to feel deeply right now. But pressure usually makes the nervous system tighten even more. You do not reconnect by demanding intensity. You reconnect by rebuilding safety. That begins with awareness, not dramatic awareness, gentle awareness. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" try asking, "What is happening in me right now?" Notice your body before you notice your story. Is there tightness in your chest? Heaviness behind your eyes? A sinking feeling in your stomach? Tension in your jaw? Restlessness in your hands? A strange emptiness when the room goes quiet? Those signals matter. Emotions often return first as sensations, not as perfectly named experiences. Before sadness becomes sadness, it may feel like weight. Before anxiety becomes clear, it may feel like pressure. Before grief has words, it may arrive as fatigue. This is why slowing down matters. Not because slowing down magically fixes everything, but because it allows signals to become audible again. Well, another helpful shift is learning not to interrogate every feeling. Some people are so used to analyzing themselves that the moment an emotion appears, they immediately start explaining it. Where did this come from? What caused it? What does it mean? How do I solve it? But not every feeling needs to be solved the moment it appears. Sometimes the most healing response is much simpler. This is here. I can stay with it for a moment. I do not need to escape it immediately. That kind of presence begins to teach the nervous system a new lesson. A feeling is not the same thing as danger, and when the body starts to believe that, emotional range can slowly begin to return. You may not notice it all at once. It may begin in very ordinary moments. A song affects you more than expected. A conversation touches something real. Or you suddenly realize you are genuinely moved by a memory. You feel sadness, but this time it does not scare you. You laugh and notice the feeling actually lingers. These moments can seem small, but they are not small. They are signs of reconnection. Here is a simple framework to remember. Numbness often grows through 3 stages. First, you feel too much. Second, you learn to avoid. Third, you stop feeling much at all. Healing often moves in the opposite direction. First, you notice the disconnection. Second, you create enough safety to stay present. Third, feeling begins to return in small, manageable ways. That is the path. Not force, not performance, not emotional intensity on command, just a slow return to inner contact. And if this process feels frustrating, that is understandable. Many people want healing to feel obvious. They want immediate proof that something has changed. But real emotional healing is often quiet. It looks like less avoidance, more honesty, more stillness, a little more tolerance for discomfort, a little less need to run, a little more ability to sit with what is real. That may not look dramatic from the outside, but inside, it is a major shift. Because every time you choose not to abandon your inner experience, you are rebuilding trust with yourself, and that trust matters. It is what allows emotions to stop feeling like intruders and start feeling like messages. If you have been feeling emotionally flat lately, please remember this. You are not empty. You are not cold. You are not incapable of depth. You may simply be in a season where your mind has gone quiet in order to protect you. And protection is not the end of the story. With patience, honesty, and a little more gentleness toward yourself, what feels distant now can become reachable again. Not all at once, not through pressure, but through presence. Maybe that is where it begins for you today. Not with fixing, not with forcing, but with one honest pause and one simple question. What am I feeling beneath all this noise? This is the quiet mindset. Here, we do not rush the mind. We learn to listen to it. If this video spoke to something you have been carrying silently, stay with this space. There is more wisdom in your inner quiet than you may realize.